Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're joined by Trent Johannesson, CISO at Phoenix Energy Services. Trent, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matthew. It's my pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass your security, so companies need a way of knowing when someone's gotten past their security. That's where Cyberlinks comes in. We've partnered with the best cybersecurity companies in the world to be able to provide our clients with the best solutions at the best prices. So whether it's managed SIM, SOC, EDR, MDR, XDR, you name it, we'll help you find the right solution at the best price. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Trent, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about Phoenix Energy Services and your role there as CISO?
Sure, I can do that, Matthew. Well, we're kind of a different company. We have multiple divisions, 7 divisions. We started with electrical and instrumentation in northern Alberta and Grand Prairie, Alberta, kind of the hub of the Montney and Duvernay area for Alberta. And we've kind of grown into a major projects group, so electrical engineering, automation, and under the automation is a cybersecurity group, compression, and a full suite of safety services. And how I got into the CISO role here kind of is a different bit of an animal. As we started as a VP of tech services, coming from a large midstream oil and gas company where I spent the majority of my career. And we just were in mergers and acquisitions mode and really realized that we have client data in-house and we have hosted data of our clients, and we really need to get our own internal security. So we kind of reorganized and came up with the CISO role. And the really nice thing it is that I am learning how to be a CISO light. We're not publicly traded, but having that data in place, it takes a lot of time. And so it's nice to be able to learn it.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love the CISO light. That's a fantastic term. I think it's really interesting the company because with Phoenix Energy, I think in the modern day, everybody's kind of thinking that information age and the age of AI. And I think the reality is, I think Phoenix is an amazing example of a great company that provides these great trade services, tradesmen, kind of opportunities. So I think it's been a real problem for a lot of people for a while, where they think, oh, I need to go to college and get this degree, and then they're kind of saddled with debt, and then but then you have these jobs like in the energy, sector with energy services, and even, you name it, plumbing, whatever. But I think this is a really great one because it's a modern job and it's a good paying job. It's a fantastic job. And somebody doesn't have to have a master's or a PhD in order to do it. But it's a fantastic job that, that's much needed.
No, I couldn't agree more. And, my background, I started as a tradesman. I started in instrumentation. In the company I was at, the only way to get to the next level was to get a dual ticket. So I went back to school and got my electrical ticket, and you become dual ticketed. And it was moving into the automation. I was quite good on computers back in quite a few years ago, we'll say. So we moved into the automation, and then I kept seeing a need across the company to do automation. And we weren't learning from all the other facilities. We were kind of siloed. We had this company or this plant fought against the bonuses for this plant, and they were competitive against each other. And I didn't like that. So we kind of grew into that. And then I started realizing that, we all know what we're doing in the area. We all know what we're doing in the field. So I started pushing and lobbying for a position to look as an automation lead across the company. So one of the things I was talking to somebody today at lunch was, you're the best salesman as yourself. If you find an opportunity, push it, ask for it, identify it. You can sit back and be the best employee and excellent at everything you do, but sometimes people are busy and they don't recognize it. So moving on past that, I was started getting into this OT cybersecurity, realizing that our control systems were not secured. We had the first real incident that pushed me to this role, or this I guess career, was the WannaCry. WannaCry came out, and we were potentially impacted. So I literally called around and said, can you guys disconnect? I want you to go to islanded operation at every gas plant in the company. And it took 2 days for everybody to kind of come back and figure out how to get there. And see, people disconnected the IT network as well as the interconnection between IT and OT. No interruptions in process, no interruptions in any production at all. But it really identified that we really need to know what we had and what we could do. So that's kind of where I took my next step and started getting into the cybersecurity and the OT space, consistency, standardization. And that started right at graphics, starting with graphics, just consistency. And then realize that we need to be smarter and better what we're doing. No open face, public facing modems out there. You know, a lot of modems around. And I went to a Public Safety Canada seminar put on by the government, fantastic seminar. And they gave you some really great hacking tools to use in a lab setting. And it literally took me 10 minutes to get through a couple of networks and get online and shut a PLC off. And that was an epiphany to me. I wouldn't call it an awakening. It scared the pants off me, because I'm like, if I'm responsible for security, I need to have a big stick or tell me I'm a consultant. If I'm a consultant and they do what they want, I'm okay. If I'm going to be responsible for this, then I need a big stick, and I need to now go back to school and actually have a degree of some sort or some qualification of some sort. So when I'm telling people what to do, it actually means something.
Yeah. So what'd you do?
Well, I went back and took my GICSP through Sands Corporation after hours. Wouldn't recommend doing that. Take the time off and go spend the money and do it in class. Trying to manage a 40, 50, 60-hour work week and kids and going back to school at 47 or 48 years old is definitely as a challenge. And now you just got to keep up the hours and stay engaged and keep learning. So, again, to go back to the beginning of this conversation on the trades, I'm a trades guy. I'm a guy that was on the tools to move and end up where I am today. We've talked about this at length at work at times. I don't know how you got here. It's just identifying opportunities and trying to fill a niche, I guess.
Now, I love that, because I mean, how long have you been at the same company now?
Phoenix, I've been 3 years coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So I was 24 years at a large oil and gas company before this. Anybody can see my LinkedIn's going to know.
Yep.
But I was there for a long time, starting in the field. I've been in the industry for 35 years now, not to age myself.
Yep.
I started young.
That's awesome. So let me ask you, so for somebody coming in, and looking, and I know you have like kind of a unique background, but I love it. I love that it's not like, the truck driver who becomes decides I want to start coding, and they go to take a coding class and they get into tech that way, or I love that it was a tradesman, and it was just a matter of the exposure to opportunities and taking them and kind of looking out, instead of just doing that one particular job and being like, oh, I'm an electrician and I'm just going to do electrical work, and kind of pigeonholing yourself. I think that's such good advice for really anybody, even in, especially I'd say in tech, because people often get they pigeonhole themselves into like, I'm a C++ programmer. Okay. And then, or, I'm a Pascal programmer. Okay. How's that going to go for you in, 20 years? Right. Or, all of this technology changes so rapidly that if you pigeonhole yourself, you may be in a great field today, but 5 years, 10 years from now, that's totally gone. And so I love the fact that you kind of did that and made such a huge change while in the same industry, kind of in the same, working with the same, company or so, and kind of moving along, but you saw the opportunity and you took it. Is this the advice you give to young people coming into the industry or even into the trade?
100%. I think it's something I learned later in my career as I was going on. I was a career guy. I was going to be at that same company for my entire career. And I kind of realized that I kind of hit a bit of a peak, and I didn't know where to go with it. So you kind of look back on it and go, you have to sell yourself. To go back to that initial conversation we had, you have to sell yourself and identify that. And I think the biggest thing is to not be afraid to stand up and say, hey, there's a problem here. Or there's an opportunity, or I'd like to learn more about that. And, being 54 this year, I'm still learning, and I'm going to continue learning and hopefully learning until the day I decide I'm going to go do something else. Don't know when that is, have no idea. Enjoying it way too much, but I think that's a really good thing. It doesn't matter. I think going to a trade or going to any university with your first degree or any post-secondary schooling, whether, like I said, it's a trade or an apprenticeship of some sort, it just opens the door for opportunity. And don't be afraid to say, because I could have spent my entire career being an instrumentation tech in the plant, pulling valves, fixing things. Could have spent my entire career and had a great career. I think one of the things, I was working at a large sour gas plant, and some guys that had been there a long time, and they were very jaded. They'd done the same job for 25 years. They were a mechanic, or they were the SCADA guy, or whatever the role was. And they hated their job every day. And I think that was the thing that kind of drove me to go and learn and try and better myself. And frankly, being outside in the cold at 35, 40, 50 years old really didn't make me want to do that. And being in, I guess, central Alberta, so in Canada, up here, we get some pretty miserable days. And I remember the minus 30 degrees Celsius days out there laying in the snow, finding leaks, because if you didn't, the plant was down and everyone could lose their job. So that's a real story. So it's a way of just identifying another opportunity and then finding something that you're passionate with. Did I think I'd want to do cyber? Never in a million years. That it just identified a problem and thought there's a solution and started asking the questions. And then it interests me. You start looking at the interesting things on it. You listen to some of these big podcasts on incidents and the interviews from, could be hackers. It could be an unintended consequence from an upgrade of a system. So it's very interesting. And as you said, it changes very rapidly, and you have to stay sharp.
You really do. And I think as I hear you talking about this, and I think about all these people who, there's those who are entrepreneurial, kind of minded, and they want to start their own business and do that. And then there are people who the idea of doing that is so crazy to them. They don't like the idea of taking that much kind of personal risk, if you will. But then, you have to, what you're saying really is you need to think of yourself as a business. Even if you're working for somebody, you still need to think of yourself as a business. If you don't stay competitive, if you're not constantly staying at the edge of things, you're going to fall behind. And if you're not out there kind of marketing yourself, if you're not marketing your business, you're not going to have a business, right? So it's different, but it's still kind of the same idea of, your products and in your service that you're providing to a company. You need to keep that up. And if you're going to be competitive, and if you want to, make sure you stay there and you've got a job in 20, 30 years, because things are changing so rapidly. I mean, we look at AI, and geez, I mean, technology was changing really fast, and then AI came along and it just went, supersonic, right? And now I think I think everybody is, I don't know, necessarily worried, but I think thinking about, what this means for them, what this means for their company, what this means for the future. And I personally think that it's a very positive thing, but kind of curious, kind of going along that thought process when it comes to AI now in the kind of the service industry that you guys are in. How do you see it? How do you see that playing out? Does it play a role at all?
100% it does. And we're exploring it in several different ways. In the automation piece, if I look at the SCADA team, they might want to use AI to help develop base code. There's always that concern because you still have to vet that code. And, even though some of the AI models don't out there specifically build you a PLC program, say in a Rockwell program or whatever, you can trick it enough to give you the code or examples of the code. So, and there are other ones out there, as there's 4,000 or 5,000 now AI models out there, independent ones. There's always a way of doing it. I think where I see AI in the service industry specifically is coming in a lot of those mundane tasks where you used to take an Excel spreadsheet and do a manual dump of that to a CSV file, export it to, say, a ticketing system or an invoicing system or ERP system, as an example. Using AI to actually push that across for you can actually streamline a lot of those processes. On the field side, I've got my concerns of it being used properly, of it being vetted properly, that it's not, AI models are only as good as who programmed them, and they're learning and they're changing, and there are biases into all of them. So using it for baseline information, you want to build some basic standards, go ahead, but you got to go through them and you got to vet them. And then I was at a conference here a few months ago in Banff, beautiful area. And one of the authors came up and he was talking, he was going to do a paper on the ethical use of AI. And he went out to ChatGPT and he got a bunch of information. So then he started asking for the sources so he could note the sources in his paper. And it wouldn't give him the sources. Some of the data came across with sources. The next piece of data came across with no source. He pushed it and pushed it and finally said to him that the information given was developed through the resources that it was able to find. Basically, is the cliff notes of what happened. So, like he said himself, you're using AI, asking for resources, and I mean the idea behind that, scouring millions of databases out there and all that information that will take us years or months or decades to do, it can do, but it interpolated data and gave it what it thought was the gospel truth. So it was a real eye opener for me to realize, and I have shared that with some of our technical teams, that AI will make its own mind up, and that's scary because you don't know if it's right or not.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think we're in this really interesting phase right now, where that's really the case. Sometimes it's absolute genius and it's brilliant. I mean, who needs Google when you've got, Chat GPT or Grok that produces an amazing result, saves you from sifting through the various results and gets you the answer. Phenomenal. And then you look at stuff like, I don't know if you played with Grok's like deep search and stuff. Wild.
Yes.
I mean, it's so cool to see its thinking, the research it's done, mind blowing. So you see that, and then to your point, then you get what may not be the right answer, and so, or when it comes to the ethical nature of it, and then when you start talking ethics, now it's what they're doing with AI to whether it's production, movie producers looking to use AI to, I mean, that's a whole nother thing, using some actors' likeness to create. And we can't be too far off from that. You can just pay anybody to put on a suit, and then now it's Tom Cruise or whoever. Actually, it appears to be the young Tom Cruise, and it looks 100% like the young. So that's the ethics of that. That's something. So I don't know where that takes us, but on the security side, got to ask you, I think AI is an interesting one in that the bad guys are using it now, right? So it used to be that you could tell that it was a bad email because the grammar was horrendous and it was misspelled. Got it. And yes, you're not a Nigerian prince, because a Nigerian prince would never have this kind of grammar. But now it's a whole nother level where the emails coming in much better. They've got I'd say cybercrime has matured greatly as an industry. We've flooded it with money over the last I'd say 4 or 5 years, and it has become a booming industry. So what do you being the CISO light there, what do you what do you see in terms of kind of combating that in the present and moving forward?
Well, that's a great question, and there's so many areas where to go with it.
Yeah.
Starting to see more and more companies obviously out there that are using AI to start detecting AI attacks, to start looking at your systems using AI. And there's that conundrum in there of, is that good or is that bad? And I haven't had my hands on enough software out there to truly understand it well enough to be versed in it. But I do think there's the challenges on it, is that as quickly as AI can evolve on the bad guy side, we have to be on the defensive side. And do you go on the attack on the defensive side? Do you just sit there and try and protect your GUI inner core? Being on the OT space, I always look at the control systems themselves, whether it's pipelines, building management, whatever, as the GUI inner core. What do we do to protect that and keep it out of there? And one of the things that scares me along and goes back to the AI thing and emails coming through is it's only as good as that one person clicks on an email. Yeah. And then you got to have the detection tools internally to detect that there is a breach. But I really don't know where it's going to go. It is one thing that does actually not necessarily keep me up at night, but keeps me intrigued. What's the best way to defend against the AI use, with the conflict overseas right now going on, where there's AI being used on both sides. I don't know where it's going to go. And frankly, I don't think anybody does right now.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a one that you could talk for 3 days on a podcast on this one.
No, I think I totally agree. I think it's anybody's ball game. No telling where it's actually going to go. Lots of theories, lots of ideas. But I do like your idea of like, do you take a defense or an offense approach? And I think security so far has, and I think it's for legal reasons, kind of geographic reasons, has been primarily defensive. And it's an interesting question because at what point do we kind of switch and say that this cyber crime has gotten to the point where it's whether it's weaponized by foreign governments or it's just individual hackers. At what point do it's tough because of the geographic boundaries, but I like this idea of the offense, but the ethics of it and the legalities of it.
I agree with that. And I think, there are companies out there, cybersecurity providers out there that are, doing active threat analysis, and they've got different divisions that may not fly under their umbrella that they're actually out there doing that. They're on the dark web. They're out there looking, they're listening, they're watching. And from what I understand, there's several that are embedded in some of these hacking communities. Love to talk to some of those guys after a couple of beverages where you might actually find out where they are. It's super interesting.
Right.
I think on the offense, like might not necessarily be on the offensive side, but they're in there knowing what they're using next. And I think that's the very cool part. It gets very clandestine in the geek world that we're in. Yeah, it's very, again, the ethical side. You're going to go nation state and you're going after someone in another country that may not be so friendly to ours. That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
You got the guy next door. Everyone thinks it's script kiddies in the basement. It's not. And especially with AI now, anybody can make an attack using AI.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be interesting to see on where it goes on the offensive side with legislation. What is Canada proposing to do? What is the United States proposing to do on putting those boundaries around the ethical use of AI, for one? And second, are they going to be willing to defend you if you go on the offensive to shut somebody down? Like you see all these guys that are on the social medias of the world chasing down these hackers and embarrassing them or getting their authorities involved. But I always wonder about what, as you said, geoeconomic boundaries. You're going into other jurisdictions. I'm not going to go to another country and act like an idiot where you might be able to do that here. And I think that does bring in that side of it, that, hey, you're entering an area that you don't know what could happen. And maybe they have extradition laws. Say if I'm attacking somebody in a country that they've got an extradition treaty with Canada. I don't know. Maybe they can actually go after me for hacking in somewhere. So yeah. I don't know where it goes. And I think again, you're bang on the head with it. It's interesting. It's scary. I do like the active threat hunting where they're out there looking at it, trying to figure out who's doing what, trying to stay ahead of it. I've been involved in several of those webinars where they kind of invite a few people into it and they kind of tell you who's doing what and who the new people out there are. And I think that's the big thing in the community, is just educating ourselves. But we don't think that they're not involved in some of those communities and watching what we're doing as well. Yeah. They'd be silly if they weren't. So,
yeah, I mean, I guess the challenge comes in where you've got, nations that are supportive of that criminal activity. And that's where it becomes a real challenge. I mean, they're not, the majority of the bad actors are not in Canada, the United States, the UK, and most of Europe. They're in places that are going to protect them more, and that becomes really challenging. Now it's a much bigger problem, and then I suppose the interesting part is then, and I guess this is what kind of fuels and empowers the white hat hackers who they go out and they're more the vigilante types, because what's that country going to do to them, right? I mean, if they're fighting them if the bad guys are coming from that country and doing things, obviously it's okay in that country. So, all right, but it gets messy. So it's really interesting. And obviously not what you and I are good at, not our forte, but a fascinating topic. And like you said, would love to have a couple of drinks with somebody like, who's in that, day to day. So back to kind of to the real world, because I do think that the ethical side of AI is a fascinating one. And it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. And I mean, AI, it's anybody's ball game, right? There's no telling which direction it goes in, who the winners are going to be, who the losers are going to be. There are just so many models out there, so many startups, and I think there's going to continue I think we're going to see thousands and thousands of them, and it will then, we'll see what actually sticks. But when it comes to security, I think this is really where things get interesting. I like, how now we're able to use AI and machine learning when it comes to things like, automating security and going through logs. I mean, just the sheer vastness of the logs that even a small business creates, it's mind blowing. And then to go through it, forget about it. There's no way a human's going to go through that stuff. So I love that aspect of it. And now from your vantage point there, where you've got your IT, your OT, you've got, people in the field, you've got people in the office, you've got a lot to cover. And without obviously getting into kind of the nitty gritty, are you guys using, in terms of like AI to help with that, in say, with a managed SOC sort of solution where, okay, the logs are coming in, they get checked, the EDR kind of gets taken care of there. Is that something that you guys leverage?
We're in a, again, kind of a different space. So even though we have like over 400 employees, we only have about 100 employees that actually have access, AD access. A lot of them are tradesmen, so they're in the field. They don't necessarily need it. The access they have might be to a ticketing system on their cell phone. So they don't have the O365 access to everything. A lot of them don't even have emails. And there's two reasons for that. Cost savings, for one. It's not necessary to do the job. And for two, it becomes easier to manage and less risk.
Yeah.
So we have our IT is outsourced and managed service provider. So this podcast is probably one of the ones that they're going to be looking at, and they look at what they can do and what they provide. So I'm in a lucky space where we provide, we get a flat fee and they support us.
Nice.
Out of sight, out of mind, but at the same time, it's also a risk reduction for us internally, which is kind of I'll say a bit of a cop out, to be honest. It puts the risk on them. So they use several different pieces of software. I'm not going to go out and speak to what they're exactly using, being they are a third-party provider, and they do provide the services to a lot of other companies as well. But yes, there's several different platforms that they use, and when you implement, like you said, a SIM, and you start getting the logs, and you go through the logs, it's even one of the modern ones. Say we just did an installation for a client, or helping with a client. And they've got a pretty good piece of software in their OT space. And it's going to take months and months to start getting valid data out of it because of the amount of information coming into those logs. And like you said, the AI side, using that to be able to go through it and get it down so the alerts are actually valid alerts and not just garbage. Because I think people get complacent with it too.
Yes.
And that's where AI can really come in and help on that. It can do so much processing of information that we can't do physically, mentally. I think that's the beauty of AI, using it in that space, and then getting the information to the people to make those final decisions. Is this a valid threat? Is there something we need to tweak on our AI or on our software, or has it identified something? I think that's the big thing, is the reactivity. In the meantime, and dwell on a system, I think will go down a lot using AI by the detection on that side of it. Because I'm not sure if you hear numbers that the average dwell time of an attacker in your system could be months, could be weeks, and every time I hear that, it changes. I've heard weeks, days, months, years. So I don't know, but I think using the AI side of it will speed up the detection.
Yeah, no, I think for sure, and that's the thing that got me. I think was when we heard just how long most of these ransomware actors were in a network before they actually implemented anything. And we know that for the longest time, for the first few years, especially around the COVID time and after, we were talking many months. They weren't fast, and to be the fact that those went missed, I think is really interesting. And I think that's where AI, to your point, is really, in my opinion, one of its strong suits, being able to go through those audit logs and see, in near real time, oh, boom, this is weird. this shouldn't be happening. Yeah, I get that the credentials were right and everything, but this is clearly a one-off here. Like, Joey shouldn't have been logging in from this, this was the first time this IP address was used, and Joey's always logging in from the same IP address, handful of or the same geographic area. So, it's tough for a small business, even a large business, this maybe especially for a large business, to say, oh, all of our people are going to be logging in from this geographic area. Okay. Yeah, not really the case with the larger you get. Fine when you're five people working out of one small shop and you're like, yep, when we only log in from the office and we have a static IP address. Cool. That's
Right.
fantastic. Anything outside of that doesn't work. Fantastic. But in the modern world where people are working from home, and and you've got a number of employees and people travel and they still need access, that becomes a lot more challenging. I think AI really kills it there. And I'll be really excited to see what happens as it gets more mature and it goes beyond just those audits, doing the audit logs and checking stuff. I mean, it's great on the sim side, and I think we're early days for that, but the future's bright. Sentinel-1's doing cool stuff. Have you seen their AI sim?
I actually was just looking at it this week. Interesting, because we were talking again with a client. I'm kind of different because I'm in a lot of the companies headquarters talking to their cyber teams, and they're always asking me pieces of software to look at. So I try and stay up on what's out there. Obviously, it's very hard because there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on in this space. There's a lot of startups. So every time you hear a flavor of the day, it seems like the next week they're not the flavor of the day anymore. So
Right.
it's a big change. But the Sentinel-1 one was one that came up here a little while ago. Actually, I found it using AI. Um,
Nice.
Asked for the top recommended ones, and I used a couple of different AI models, and it specifically kept coming back to me. So I kind of looked at it a little bit, and we have to do a little more digging into it just to truly understand a few things where it would fit into my space and into my client space.
Yeah.
Um, it's definitely an interesting, I guess, idea and a different take on it.
Totally.
Um, One of the other ones I think is interesting, and it's not necessarily using AI right now, is just the cybersecurity awareness training platforms that are out there.
Yeah.
And some are starting to push towards that as well. And I think, as we talked about, the people being trained in that one person clicking on that email, that one fish email, AI detection, that's great. But why is somebody typing two emails at the same time? Why is this guy not online? He's typing an email at 2 a.m. That kind of side of it. But at the same time, having the AI sitting. I lost my train of thought there. Sorry.
No, having that the AI for the cybersecurity training, I think is
Yes.
yeah, that's where you're going with that, and that's pretty cool. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that it'll be interesting to see where it goes in there, where it can adapt to what that person's learning capabilities are as well. Because some of the tools are, it was through this before in my previous career, it was notorious that the same few people clicked on the same thing every time, not necessarily the same email, same people, the same ones had the highest click rates. And it'd be interesting to see if using AI on that training would eliminate some of that, if that actually starts to trend it down. Um, and even though we're in an industry that's techie, being where we are, a lot of the people using the tools aren't.
Yeah.
We've got kids coming out now and going into the trades that have never logged onto a laptop or a computer, never.
Isn't that crazy?
Right? They don't know. It's all on this phone, and they live and die on the phone, and that phone is another risk to us as well, right? So
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, and it'll be really interesting to see how that cybersecurity training improves, because I think historically it's been really dry and it's been tough, and I know there's some good providers out there that are coming up with much more creative stuff that is it's much more entertaining, and I think that's really the key to success. Um, but and some of them are starting to dabble in using AI in what they create and what they and how they track the training. So if it's
mhm.
let's pick on Joey again. If it's always Joey, then how you do remedial training with Joey and get them up to speed. It'll be really interesting to see what AI does on that side, because it's always going to be a weak point. I mean, you look at the MGM Grand, where they spent a fortune on cybersecurity. When it comes to being high tech and security being top notch, I think we can all agree that Vegas, that they take security pretty serious, right? And then to be able to be socially engineered into this, I mean, that's just brilliant. yeah, brilliant on their part, right? But it just goes to show you, no matter how great your security is, no matter how much you're spending on it, where there's a will, there's a way, and the bad guys are going to get in, and that's what's really tough. And so let me ask you, so on the energy side, I think we're all a little grateful that we're not on, that we're not in Vegas, for a multitude of reasons. I mean, just so many reasons. Sorry, Vegas, we love you, but seriously,
Yeah.
I mean, but when it comes to something like this, where you've got you're talking like energy sector stuff, your utilities, and that's a vital infrastructure, to the nation. How do you go about that? Is the stress there, like, shit, every day you're stressing, or is it one of these things where, look, you put the right policies and procedures in effect, you're doing the best you can, and how do you deal with the stress of that, because it's there's a lot on the line.
I think for our clients and my previous employer, there was a lot of stress in it. And I think there's still a lot of people internal to some of these companies that are very techy as well, that don't believe they're a target. And I think that's a big part of it, is that it's, Colonial Pipeline might not have been a target. It was a target of opportunity that came up. MGM, for the billions of dollars they're putting through daily, weekly, monthly, I can see that being a direct target. I think a lot of the other targets out there are just soft spots that the AI robots are running around, and they find a weakness, they alert somebody, and now they try and exploit it. So you don't necessarily need to be a top 5 oil and gas company to be a target. You can be a small junior.
Yep.
But when all your production is hung up in a ransomware attack, that's a bad day.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people do worry about it. And I think there's a lot of people still I'll pick on the small and juniors, not to pick on my clientele. But they don't understand the risk yet. They're busy making production. They don't understand that they're at risk, and they don't know that they're a target. They don't think it's an issue. And I think that's part of it, as you kind of said before. It's a target of opportunity.
Yeah.
Whatever comes up. And there are a lot of people, every time you bring it up, and I'm in talking to different executives at different companies, and they all have that worry. The one thing I find, which is interesting, is I hear it every day. I hear people worry about it. You see the reports that say it's top of mind for CISOs, it's top of mind for the executives. But I don't see the money sometimes going where that attitude comes from. It's they know it's a risk, but they're not willing to spend the money at times because there's no ROI. There's no return on investment for it. It's a risk reduction. Sure, maybe it is. But people, I think, we're trying to approach it from a different way now, where it's not telling them the sky is falling. It's not Chicken Little. We're well past that. That is the reality of it. But I think people are tired of hearing about it. And in a recent attack in Canada, one of the big ones, their share prices took a huge drop. A week later, they're right back up.
Yep.
So I don't know where we're going to go with it in that case, but it is definitely on people's minds. But I just don't know what the right way to make it where they have to follow through and spend the money. It needs to be brought in as part of us. I start trying to sell it now internally, as far as supporting our clients on, set it up as an integrity program, your safety program. It's not a one and done. This is part of your integrity and how you do things. This is your training of your people. It needs to be a core competency of what you do every day. It's never going away. Understand it, learn it, and accept it. And I think the only thing that'll help with that, and I hate regulation from government, to be very honest, I don't think government generally doesn't know exactly what we do and how to make it effective. But seeing the fallout from Colonial Pipelines and the TSA directive out of the States, and being involved in helping do some TSA governance for some clients, and then seeing what the federal government in Canada is pushing across right now as well, is very similar. We're usually a year or two behind the US. We just kind of watch and see how it goes. And then I don't know if we're slow or a little more cautious and wait to see how it works in the US. But the Alberta Energy Regulator has just come out recently and put a whole list of facilities, whether it's energy, whether it's water or wastewater, anything that falls under public safety, which is critical to life. They have identified all of those facilities and called them and said, you have to meet the new compliance by May 31st, 2025. So while I'm talking to people, they're like, there's a new regulation. There's a new compliance out there. Oh boy, now we need to do something. that was put into place last year, and people are now starting to freak out that they've got a month, but what are the penalties?
Exactly.
And I think that's a whole other conversation I want to ask you about. That is, have you started seeing people be penalized for TSA and not being compliant with TSA? And I want to see, conversely, on our side of it, if they start actually finding people for not being compliant, and our company's just going to be like pick our large sports companies out there where they got a salary cap, but they'll just pay the penalty and fine and just do business. It's part of doing business. I'd like to see where governance or the governments go in that place. Are the fines big enough to force people to do it, or is it going to be an effective way of managing it?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, I think, for a lot of people, it needs to be personal. I think that it needs to be just like where I think we saw a huge change on in the financial sector, and I'd say in the publicly traded, for publicly traded companies. Now, when the CFO signs off, at least in the US, and says these financials are, yep, guess what? If you lied, you're going to jail. Right. So
Yeah.
it's not like, oh, I just made a mistake. Nope, that it's you. You're on the line for it personally. And I think that's the direction it needs to go, not in a punitive way, but in a the CEO of a company, if you've been told, hey, look, the CISO's come to you and says, we need to do X, Y, and Z to prevent this. And you said, nah, we're okay. We're gonna save that money. Okay, now that might be fine, and it might be the right call for the business. But then if that bad thing happens, and God forbid people die because of it, right? Because now we're talking about public utilities. It's a public safety issue. Somebody dies because of it. Was it okay to just pass up on that? So I think people do have to be held accountable, and I think it has to be personal. I don't think a fine works. And I think we see in the US with like HIPAA compliance, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
almost a joke when it comes to the healthcare, like, oh, HIPAA compliance, whatever. They don't care. It's just and for and this has been going on for decades. And hospitals are hit constantly with ransomware, and it's just ridiculous. Why? Because there's no real teeth there. And if there is some fine, first of all, nobody's going around auditing really. And if something does happen, oh, maybe a bad thing becomes a little bit worse because you get hit with a fine. But the reality is nothing's happening because it's just a regulation without any real teeth. Now, somebody will probably, spot check me on that and be like, no, that's not true. Okay, well, whatever it is, if that's not the case, then why is nobody really doing anything about it, right? So, I think I'm right there with you. I'm not a huge fan of regulation because it's always behind, and also the bad guys can always, if you want to get around a regulation, you're gonna, like, it keeps the honest person, it slows down the honest person, and it doesn't do anything for the dishonest ones, right? So
Yeah.
it just gives them another hurdle that they're going to get around, whereas the honest person is gonna have to, traverse that obstacle. They're going to put in the time, the effort, the money, and everything, and there's still going to be people circumventing it. So what good did it do? So when it comes to cybersecurity, to your point, I think it's gonna have to. I think there's gonna have to be real teeth there, for individuals, especially when it's public safety stuff. And I'd love to. I think as a CISO or a CIO who says, "Hey, look, for us, it's a tough one to say, but I think it has to be one of these things where it's like you can't play hardball. You obviously want to get everybody on your side and be like, look, everybody, we should be in sync on this, the whole C-suite. Um, but when there's that absolute resistance to like the most obvious things, and we see this a lot with like smaller family owned businesses where they may
Mm-hmm.
have a few hundred people, and it's smaller, but it's still a few hundred people working in the textile, it's whatever it might be, manufacturing, and they don't do what's needed because they see it as their own money, and they're not really safeguarding anything. But you got hundreds of people whose livelihood depends on you making the right decision. Yeah, it's your money, but it's also their way of life. So, how big can the ransom be before it, shuts it down? How long can you be out of business without paying the ransom? Or, it's funny because the statistics are so high, on how many small businesses go out of business when they're hit with a ransomware within, like, it's something ridiculous. Within like 2 years, some huge number, like 45% go out of business. It's like, that's ridiculous. So I don't know. You get me on my soapbox here. I'll get animated and but it's a really tough one because you're balancing as the CEO or the owner, you're balancing all the the profits, the loss, all the other operations. As the CISO and the CIO, it becomes really obvious like, this is critical. We need to do this. And I don't know. Have you run into that, as yet where you're like, guys, I think this is really important. We need to do it, or maybe on the client side, some of your clients where they're like, we really need to do this, but they can't get buy-in from from the CEO or the rest of the C-suite.
I definitely see it on the client side, probably weekly.
No.
Every webinar you're in or every time you talk to them, like, we really need some more. We need some more automation. It might be it needs some more detection tools. It might be change management tools. They need something on the control systems. It could be on the IT space, like you said before. And I think I don't know if the message gets through to the board. I know when I finally got my voice at the board at my previous employer, I had you go in, it would be red, yellow, green. You got your pie chart, red, yellow, green, where we are, and are we better than we were last quarter? And they didn't hardly look up from their papers. No disrespect to any of you who happen to watch this, but we had a new lady that came on the board of directors, and I was presenting our statistics. And her background, she was in charge of a public safety company providing to the general public, and their rules are much more stringent. And she was very, very good. And she actually kind of put the rest of them on blast and said, listen, what he's saying is very important. You guys need to understand this. This company's at risk. And having a champion at that board level, above the ownership, or at that level of it, was the night and day change in the attitude of that board. And we started putting things in, and we put in some, a centralized DMZ for access. So you can see anybody and everybody coming through. One-stop shop for finding out who's coming in and where and why. One-stop shop to cut all that access off if you need to. So it took that person at that level. So I think finding that right champion that you would have in there to get to that level internally, whether you're at an energy company, whether you're at a manufacturing company, whether you're agriculture, there's a lot of tech in there. Getting that right person on that board. And I think for a board to be effective, to understand that they're making those decisions that they might not understand. They're looking at returns. They're looking at the ROI. They're looking at the investors. What are the shareholder confidence in what we're doing right now? Are we giving enough per unit? Dividends, man, you hear about dividends all the time and how much is coming out there. But I think if they realize the risk, and that risk, and like you spoke to about on the business readiness side of it, is what are you going to do in a bad day? And if you don't have the money to set it up, or you don't have the money to do backups and then test those backups as an example, sure, you're a small business. It doesn't cost you a lot of money to have a backed up system sitting there knowing it's clean. Hire it out. Have a company do that for you, manage it for you. You have a ransomware attack because your security is not in place, or somebody clicked on an email or whatever it might be. Roll it back. You're not broke. And at the same time, start hearing more of this, and I want to ask you this question is, if you don't have these programs in place, are you seeing it coming back that the cybersecurity insurance is being denied? Because they are very quick to try and deny. So from your side in the US, are you seeing the same thing?
Immediately. I mean, it is and it's funny because I think a lot of insurers thought, oh, hey, this is going to be great for us. We're going to start underwriting, cybersecurity policies. And boy, did they get they get it handed to them real fast. And so they started, first of all, a lot of them stopped doing it. New ones popped up, thought they could do it better. And now they've become so stringent on the requirements. And if one little thing was off, sorry. So they're, I'm not the biggest fan of insurance, for that reason. I mean, I'm just not, because their goals are not aligned with with the person getting the policy, right? They're at odds. And for me, I don't like that as a business model. I like, for us, ours is really simple. We always align our goals with our clients every single time. That's what we do. We look out for their interests, and then we're like, great, cool, fantastic. No matter how we structure a service or product, anything, it's always with the clients, getting our goals and motives aligned with theirs. Perfect. I think when you get away from that, it all falls apart, and there's a winner and a loser, and I don't like that. And I think insurance is just one of those games that it is a there is always going to be a winner and a loser, and so I think that's a real problem. And yes, on our side in the US, we see it constantly, and unfortunately, you can't necessarily, for a lot of places, for risk mitigation, for financial mitigation, for compliance reasons, they have to have it. Maybe the board wants it,
Mhm.
fine, so they get it. The nice part is, now that they've gotten so stringent, if they're doing all of those things, they're probably good. And they probably don't need the insurance, because they've made themselves a very hardened target. The list has gotten really extensive for most of the cyber policies that I've seen over the last, I'd say, year. Rewind 2, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it was almost a joke. You were just signing up with it, but to say you wanted it, here's some money. Okay, we'll cover you. And it was a joke. And so the joke policies changed very quickly, and now it's what's it like up there? Is it entirely different, where is it very stringent on the requirements you need to meet?
It is definitely getting there. When I first started with the company, we were doing our cyber policy, and I reviewed the policy, and there were the check boxes and the ticks you had to put on that were very minimal.
Yeah.
I think it was a one page. It's a one pager. And we just redid it here recently. And there's a lot more information, a lot more questions. And you look at those questions, and you better answer those questions properly, because they're going to use any of those as an exemption to get out of it if there happens to be an event.
Yep.
And then the second to that is, like you said, do you have a cybersecurity program? Yes. Checkbox. Yes, we do. Show us.
Yep.
You can say you have a program, and you got a binder full of your cyber policies and your practices and everything else. When was the last time you actually audited them? When was the last time you updated them? So this goes back to your previous conversation about starting to get companies to think of it more as a safety program, part of their business. And the same time as that is to look at call it a business readiness or a business impact study.
Yep.
Doesn't have to be a big one. Doesn't have to be a detailed multi-day thing. But if you look at it and say, if we lost our computers, your IT system for 3 days, can we survive? And what do we do? What is your workaround? If you go back to TSA, they make you do that and say, can you segregate your systems, and can you run? OTIT, can you run? Which I think is a great exercise. And I think a lot more companies should be doing that specifically. And that all ties into the insurance, because if you can show you're doing that and you have an incident, and second to that, you have your backups, it's not that bad day. It's not that bad. And in the case of one of the large oil and gas companies that got hit here last year, they took a huge tank on their share prices for that few weeks, and they went right back up. So it almost, for me, was a negative reinforcement for industry.
Yep.
Where, man, they took a big hit, but their profits are right back up, and they end up having record quarters. So it's almost like a false flag at times. And I look at it, I'm like, maybe as an investor, I'm going to start seeing the next time one of these guys gets hit, I might just invest at that low dollar and hope that it comes back up. No,
Yep.
That's kind of risky, but it was surprising to me to see how fast a very large hit recovered. Yeah. And the shareholders don't care at that point. They're getting their return, they're getting their percentage points, they're getting their dividends on it. That's what they care about. And on the other side, they're spending the money to try and improve their posture and trying to improve the endpoint detection and trying to improve all the systems they have, and costing a lot of money. But as long as the shareholders get what they want at the other end, they don't care. So I think we're in a real conundrum on that side of it. Is, again, I think across the border, we're seeing the same thing in both areas. Like I said, Canada's a little less litigious than the States is typically. But it's starting to move that way more and more. So everything we see down there, as I said, filters up here within a couple of years. It could be EPA policies. It could be cyber policies. They do filter up here.
Yeah.
We're the largest trading partner with you. We're physically connected by water, power, gas, oil. We need each other. So, we're going to be aligned on how we're going to manage it at most times.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good thing. And I think, even what we're seeing with the better insurance policies, and to take the flip side of the argument, kind of with when it is negative reinforcement, but at the same time, it's also it speaks to the resilience of the business, of kind of the good guys in general, that the bad guys are going to go in, they may do some damage, but we're going to, we're going to get hit, but we're going to get back up, and it's not going to be the end of it. And so I like that aspect of it.
Mhm.
But I do think there's room for improvement when it comes to getting the C-suite to buy in on some of the security stuff. I still think and I do think we're seeing a lot more of it in the US. I'd say I think you're right about the year two year difference. I think you're going to see more buy-in as a general rule, from the C-suite, coming this year and next. If because I think that's what we've seen in the States. If most things are a couple years behind, I think you're going to start seeing more and more of that. Mostly because, and you're right, maybe it's just more of a conservative approach to things, right? You're like, let's wait and see. Well, let's be a little more conservative, a little more cautious. And I think in the U.S. The fail fast, kind of like mindset is prevalent. Like, okay, that didn't work. Okay, cool. Let's try something else. And I think from the Canadians' perspective, they're like, just wait a sec, they'll figure it out. Okay, they got it. All right, we'll do that now. Right?
Yeah.
No need to fail a bunch of times. Let's just wait and see what happens. Okay, got it. Cool. Smart. That's a really smart way of going about it. I mean, I gotta hand it to you. It's really good. That's a nice way to do it. So I think you're going to see a lot more of the buy-in, because I think that's clearly been what's happened over the last couple of years. It's gotten better and better and better, and I think it's far more supportive, and there's a lot more C-suite buy-in when it comes to security and what IT really needs. I think the mindset of it's just an expense in the budget. I think those are days of the past. Most places see it as like, well, we don't exist without IT. Like, it used to be like, well, what are you gonna do if the power goes out? Well, yeah, you're right. Nothing, right? We're dark ages. We're not doing shit, right? We're gonna sit here in the dark until the power comes back on. What do you mean? And I think now we're in the same spot when it comes to IT. When the internet goes out, what are you gonna do? Not a whole lot. And if IT is out completely, the computers are all gonna come on. The electricity might as well be off. There's nothing we can do, right? Because we're in the modern age. And I think that mindset is pretty prevalent for the most part, and people are starting to appreciate that more. That it's not just an expense, but a operational necessity. So I look forward to that kind of improving. Still, there's still room for improvement, I think, all the way around. But I love your point about finding the champion. Like, I think that's a really, really, I think that's the big takeaway here today, is
Mhm.
finding a champion on the board in the C-suite. But you got to find a champion who's kind of got the who can get in there and really help turn the tide for you in the argument. Because if it's just you against the whole C-suite, if it's just you against the whole board, one against a bunch doesn't work out well, unless you're, Andre the Giant, and then it's, I'm not used to fighting just one guy. But in any event, yes. So I think that's what it comes down to. So I love that. Best takeaway yet is find a champion. I love that.
I think it's a huge thing, and it was, I was lucky enough to have someone that had my back before help me drive the OT cybersecurity side of it, to drive our standards, to say you need this. And she, as an executive, would started taking me into those leadership meetings, saying like, listen, we have IT in control, but OT doesn't have this yet, and this guy's going to help bring it. So we want to listen to him. So I had that first champion to get me into that, that upper management level of the company. And then I got that C-suite champion. So it doesn't necessarily need to be the one. It would necessarily be, what's the one to get you to the next step? What's the one to get you to the next step? And identify those in those companies. And it could work on the sales side of it. No different for any of these guys selling software and products. Who is that guy? Who's that one? Decision maker? Or is he someone that's going to be able to get the ear of the decision maker and start helping you get in the door? So I think it's important, and finding those people is the key in a lot of these processes, whether it's cyber, whether it's the sales side of it, whether it's you've got an issue in your company you need to deal with. You need to find somebody that's got your back.
Yeah, well said. Trent, This has been an absolute pleasure. It's been awesome. But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find out more about Phoenix Energy and more about you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, phoenixenergy.ca on the World Wide Web. We also have phoenixsgrnow.com out of Texas. We just opened up in Texas right now. So it is 100% US entity. That's our newest venture. I'm on LinkedIn. Look my name up, Trent Johannesson. I'm out there. I'm on a ton of different, trying to sit on a ton of different cyber, not necessarily boards, but communities. Try and follow through and try and be well-rounded, whether it's buildings and looking at the buildings downtown, whether it's agriculture, whether it's oil and gas. Try and stay everywhere because we're all affected with the same thing. We're all in it together, and we got to come up with the best way to defend ourselves and also educate people.
Well said. Trent, thanks again for coming on. Until next time.
I appreciate it. Take care.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.